Hello, this is Michelle Houck, and this is my ID project. So for my instructional design project, I chose to focus on my 11th grade English classroom. I work at a Title I school that's full of diverse learners, and this particular class that I teach has a disproportionately high ratio of SPED students. I have an 8 in this class. I have a high level of SPED students and a handful of students that require a one-on-one aid. So it's a unique learning situation. So the purpose and need for this plan is to, one, make sure students are able to make a connection between the play, The Crucible, which we read in class together, and instances of modern day hysteria. So the idea is to allow students to make those connections, build those bridges, and see that the play is not just a isolated story that we read in class. But the bigger and more important target and purpose of the plan is that students will improve their writing and their presentation skills. So this is the transferable skill I'm looking to achieve within this project. And the need for the plan is that while I have done a Crucible unit in the past, I find that students struggle with their writing and presentation skills regardless, but specifically for the Crucible, they do struggle with those connections. So the purpose of this plan, or the need for the plan, is to improve those skills and finding those transferable skills so that they can use them not only later in my class, but also later in other classes. So the goals of the plan: students will be able to successfully, 1, use reliable sources to research, 2, write and present findings, and 3, use oral presentation skills. So the intervention or the change that I'm using to achieve this goal is that I'm hoping that this project, the way I'm teaching it, becomes more interactive so that students are checked on throughout the student progress is checked on throughout the project, and that skills are reinforced to meet the objectives. Also, I'm using backwards planning because I want to make the students understand the goals and expectations for the end product so that they see why we're doing what we're doing to get to that place. So, like I said, I'm going to use backwards planning or understanding by design as my instructional model to support my plan. So UBD, or backwards planning, is having the end task be the beginning of your planning process. So stage 1 is identifying goals, what you're going to do, and then stage 2 is how are you going to know students met that goal? Are they achieving? What are they doing? How are they getting there? And then the last step is the actual lessons that are required to get from stage 1 to stage 2. So backwards planning puts the final first and then says, okay, what do the skills do the students need to be successful in that final? And then step 3, what are these day-to-day things we can do to get those skills to be able to complete the final? So, as I said, stage 1 is identifying desired results. Within Wiggins and McTee's book, they give you key questions to kind of help you brainstorm that plan. So what should students know, understand, and be able to do? What's the ultimate transfer we seek as a result of this unit? What enduring understanding are desired? What essential questions will be explored in depth and provide focus to all learning? And after I go through these key questions, I'm going to switch to a different thing to see how I planned it. So stage 2 is determine acceptable evidence, like I said, and then stage 3 is planning the learning experiences and the key instructions. So the sequencing, resources, goals, things that you need to get that done. So in my concept of alignment, I took each of the key questions and put it into its own category. This helped me backwards plan because I was forced to do one step till it was done before I started the second step. So a big piece is for stage 1 is ultimate transfer goals, right? So my ultimate transfer goal for this unit is to apply themes of study to current and future events and issues. Directions to the project are linked here if you want to see the actual project I did. Then you need to pick the standards you're going to focus on. So I picked 4 standards. One is a review standard. Like I said, many of my students have learning difficulties. So while citing strong evidence is not an 11th grade standard, it is something we need to go over for students to be successful. And then the last part of stage 1 is coming up with the student's essential question. So students know what they should be thinking about, should be questioning to be able to get to that end result. So the essential question is, what effect does fear have on people and society if allowed to go unchecked? And does history always repeat itself? So that was stage 1, right? Big goals, big ideas, big concepts. Then in stage 2, you go over how will we know the students have achieved the desired results? What are we going to accept as evidence of student understanding and their ability to transfer their skills? And how do we evaluate performance in a fair and consistent way? So in the UBD framework, they have 6 facets. I chose to focus on 3. So students should be able to interpret, apply, and empathize. And those are the 3 facets of the program I wanted to work on. So the unit goal is that students will be able to use reliable sources, write and present findings, and use oral presentation skills, which is a lot of goals, but they kind of build off of each other, right? Using the sources, writing up their research, presenting their finding, they build. So the performance task, this is that end piece, the thing that the big goals we're focusing farther in. So specifically, students will create a 3 to 5 minute oral presentation that expresses the historical and cultural background of the situation, the discrimination and lasting effects of the issue, and how it connects back to the themes evident in the play, The Crucible. If you need or would like to look at it more in depth, you can go to that link above where I link the actual directions given to the students. So that is the performance task. That's the big thing at the end of the unit. However, throughout the unit, there would be other evidence that I can use to make sure students are achieving those goals. Those are formative and summative assessments, so turning in drafts of their research, written reports, those are the summative. So the speech itself, the draft of their research, their write-up, these all give me summative end goal pieces, right? Do they understand? To get to that point where there's formative assessment, so one-on-one conferences with students, turning in research in early to check on the progress, graphic organizers to guide their research, reteaching and checking on MLA citations, and rubric-graded performance task. So that last question is how can we make it fair and consistent? And I chose to use rubrics for that. So there's a rubric for the speech issues, there's a rubric for the write-up, written issue, and that leads to fair and consistent data that I can collect because it is standardized in some way. And I'm using the rubrics that my district requires us to use. So the last stage of backwards planning is the day-to-day learning activities. So this piece of the chart, right, is just sort of an overview because I did an alignment chart later on. So I have a variety of learning activities and a day-to-day overview. So this is a 5-day lesson. The way my school works is I see the students for an hour and a half every other day. So 5 days is actually 2 weeks in my school. And then their project would be over. And of course, they've read the play already. We've done the work for that. So this is really just working on that real world connection. So on day 1, They're introing the project, they're reviewing reliable sources, and they're beginning their research. On day 2, we're conferencing, redirecting, expanding. On 3, they are typing up their write-up. On 4, they're continuing that write-up and practicing their public speaking skills. And then on the last day, they are starting to present their projects. Links to all these lessons, rubrics are there for you. Now, before I move on to those daily activities, I wanted to have a moment to sort of reflect on, from an instructional design standpoint, why I chose backwards planning. I think backwards planning as a learning theory really forces the instructor to make genuine, sincere choices. Sometimes, especially at this time of the year or when we're especially busy or tired, it seems or feels like every day you're just filling time. Whereas with backwards planning, you start with the end goal in mind, so every activity becomes meaningful in a way that you're building towards that end result you've already figured out. It creates rigorous and genuine connections that cause the students to think a little bit harder. It's not just a multiple choice test. Generally, backwards planning has, as I said, a performance task. So they're creating, analyzing, empathizing, interpreting what they've learned to create something new. And I think that creates a better experience for the students. They learn more, they understand why they're learning what they learn. And when they know what the end goal is in mind, they tend to remember more because it's not just a random assignment. All of this work builds off each other and they know where it's going. So giving students that information ahead of time, you yourself as an instructor knowing that information ahead of time creates a better lesson for everyone. So moving on to my learning activities. So the way I structured this is that each learning outcome was a state standard. And then I had learning objectives, what the students will be able to do by the end of the lesson, the activity itself, and then the assessment. Some standards had multiple learning objectives because they appeared more than once within the series of lessons. So for instance, the 11 to 12.6 standard is about adapting speech to a variety of contexts. So students will be practicing this skill more than once as they are applying it to their speech itself. So students will be able to pick the correct tone and word choice to convey a message in their first lesson, and the second lesson is presenting their findings on their modern hysteria in a well-written and practiced speech. So this was 2 learning activities. The first learning activity I got from a teacher whose blog and is called Secondary Sarah. And the link to this lesson is there if you want to look at it. So, but this is the idea in her own words, quoted in the document. But the basic idea is that students are given a randomly selected scenario, and then they have a very short speech in which they try to convey that message, and the other students have to guess. It has a low fear ratio because the students are doing very short speeches and they're fun, but it practices a skill. We can go over what that kind of means. And then the second learning activity is the actual speech itself, going over the rubric and the outline and the directions. Both are linked there. And then the assessment is both, for this standard, is both formative and summative. It's teacher observations, it's a collection of graphic organizers, and the summative is, of course, the speech itself, which is what will meet the standard, right? The performance task. So the next learning activities section is for standard 11 to 12.2, which is write informative and explanatory text to examine and convey complex ideas, concepts, and information clearly and accurately through effective selection, organization, and analysis of content. So students are going to be able to research a given topic and create a document that connects the research topic to the play of the crucible. So this would come towards the beginning of the unit. Students will have researched, and then they need to write up their research. So the learning activity is that students will type up their findings on their research topic. The write-up will have 5 paragraphs reflecting the 5 topics of research: cultural background, historical background, lasting effects, discrimination, and its effects connection to the crucible. Students will need to convert a multitude of research into an organized essay. And essays in quotes because it's not technically an essay, it is more of a write-up. Anyway, peer editing of the written product using the linked worksheet. So this will have, once again, both formative and summative assessments attached to it. So student research will be collected and graded before the writing process to check for accuracy. They also have a one-on-one with me checking for any gaps with their research. They also will be peer editing. So this write-up will go through multiple people before it gets turned in, but that turn-in will be a summative assessment. So it'll be graded using that district-mandated rubric for a fair assessment and also for data collection. The third standard is 11 to 12.7, conduct short and well as sustained research projects to answer a question, including a self-generated question, or solve a problem, narrow or broaden the inquiry when appropriate, synthesize multiple sources on the subject, demonstrating understanding of the subject under investigation. So students will be able to do 3 things because this is a complicated standard, and so it requires multiple learning activities. So students will be able to research a modern example of mass hysteria using credible sources. Students will be able to create connections from the research to the play, and students will be able to synthesize the research into a written document formatted in MLA8 that mirrors an essay. So as I said, there will be multiple learning activities that support these goals. So students will explore what makes a reliable online source using a web quest, and the web quest is linked below. That forces them to kind of review what a reliable resource is, how it works, all that stuff. Then they'll research their topic using a graphic organizer to direct their research. That's given to them by me and created by me. It's linked at the top of the page if you would like to take a look at it. After it's checked and graded, students will take that research and convert it into paragraphs that explain each of the topics. So once again, it gives the feel of an essay without an intro or a conclusion. And then last but not least, it needs to be an MLA 8. This is also the other standard we'll talk about in a second, but they need to reference the website, the MLA website linked below to format and to answer any citation questions. As I said, the citation standard is a review standard, so while it is important and we're going to talk about it a bit in class and it is there for the students, it is a review, so the amount of learning activities involved with it is pretty minimal. So once again, this has both formative and summative assessments attached to it as a topic. Formative, teacher observation of research skills and need for support. So while they're researching in class, checking on students, observing them, seeing who needs help. Collection of graphic organizers to check for understanding. One-on-one with teacher to check, redirect, or expand research. And then the summative is research graded for completeness and depth of understanding. So that research is being turned in, graded, and checked and returned. So that way, if students are struggling in an area, it holds them accountable for each of the pieces, but it also gives me a chance after that one-on-one conference to have a secondary conference of where they are missing information and where they can expand. And then the last standard, as I said, is the review standard for citing strong and thorough textual evidence support analysis. This is a 910 standard, but it is still a very important aspect of what students need to be able to do well in high school and if they choose to continue on in their education. So they're going to refer to their research graphic organizer, which at the bottom of it has a review of MLA that we kind of go over, and it gives them a place to kind of keep track of where they're getting their information. And then once again, they have the access to the MLA website where students are guided through those requirements. Again, if what the review we have in class is not quite enough. And this is only a formative assessment. It just is checked through the assignment for completeness and accuracy, and students are helped and told to revise until it's appropriate MLA 8 format and citations. So this is not a one-time grade. It's a continuous revision until they get it right. So to be able to complete this unit, students will need a multitude of things. They'll need the play, the graphic organizer, the directions, the writing rubric, the speech rubric, all of which are attached above or within that box. And then for technology, students will need access to Chromebooks or some kind of computer, as they'll need access to the web quest, the MLA resource site. They'll need access to Google Docs to be able to type up their research findings, and they'll need access to Google Slides because you see in the research directions, they need one slide as a background for their presentation. So while they do need a slide, it's not incredibly important to the learning activities. And then below, I have all the links for the resources I used to create this document. Okay, so after backwards planning my unit, I'm going to reflect on what I thought of it, how it went. I think understanding by design or backwards planning works really well as a learning theory for this particular unit because it, like I said earlier, it forces me as a designer and an educator to put the end goal at the forefront. Everything is now building towards something instead of these sort of random blocks that I can try to assemble something with at the end. It makes it easier for me as an educator because I know where I'm going, and I think it makes it easier for students because they know where they're going as well. So they benefit from the end task and can get more out of it. I also think the performance task is both engaging and rigorous. It asks a lot of the students. It's a difficult task, but it is interesting. They get to pick their topics or assigned randomly. And so I think both the unit and the learning theory add a lot to this existing plan. Where areas I have concerns. I have concerns about the gradual release of responsibility, that it's a little bit too quick within learning activities. I want students to feel the ownership of their learning. However, I don't want them to flounder in the range of possibilities. I also taught this unit, and I think the students may need more support in just basic research skills, which would be a review. But based on my students, that's what I think they would need to be added. I also think this would be too short for an actual culminating experience. It's not long enough to have a full study done on it, even with the changes that I made. This is not how I've taught this unit in the past. I tried to integrate a lot more support and graphic organizers and things to get students going. I also think it could be a little bit more technologically heavy. Like I said, I like this unit as an idea for my culminating experience, though I'd need to think about how I'd want to differentiate it. It is possible that one group could do all of these activities online, the graphic organizer and such, and the other group not as much. But at this point, I think I would need to see how I could make these differences larger. I don't feel like at this point there would be much difference where I would find any sort of change. And I think I need to expand on the unit, find more data collection points. At this point, I have multiple rubrics, but I think a survey or something along those lines would be interesting, really understanding how students feel about their learning. While they may do it well, do they really feel the ownership of what they've created? The types of changes I plan to make. I would expand on the kind of learning activities. Many of them are independent, and I'd like there to be, except for the peer editing, and I think I'd like there to be more collaborative work in reflection on what I created. Once again, I enjoy the learning theory. I just think that the planning process went well, but I would need more collaboration earlier on instead of towards the end of the project. That way students can learn and grow off each other at the beginning and feel more comfortable towards the end. Though there are many kind of whole class activities, there aren't as many small group activities as I would like. I also would like to authentically integrate more technology into the unit. At this point, there are a few things, but really the web quest is the only particularly web required activity. I could, in theory, do the rest of the activities with no internet at all except, or no technology at all, except of course the actual research. But even then we could just go to the library. So I think the authenticity of using the technology could be improved. At this point, we're using it more as a support for the learning and not necessarily as strong of a tool as it could be. Overall, I think the project and the learning theory was very supportive in the learning process. I think that it added, like I said, a rigor and understanding for both the students and the instructor. And the choices were made to facilitate learning. They focus on transferable skills that get students from point A to that performance task in a successful manner, which is really the core of what it is to be a backwards planner and an instructional designer. So overall, I think it was a very successful design. These are just my thoughts on how it could be improved further. Thank you.